All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to another episode of BIM After Dark Live. My name is Jeff, also known as the Revit Kid. This is episode 91. Thank you guys for joining me today. I'm super excited to be back live. If you didn't see the previous episode, it was probably like almost 2 months ago. And I think the last episode was Paul Aubin. We were talking about stairs and Revit. So definitely check that out. But this is episode 91. We're rolling into 100 episodes this season, which is pretty wild. If this is your first time here, this is a live stream every Thursday night, give or take, sometimes Thursday in the day, but mostly Thursday nights. And we talk about not just Revit, but BIM and just any AEC technology in relationship to it. This season, so episodes 91 through 100 are going to be a little unique in that we're going to be focusing a lot on residential architecture and construction, single family, small residential architecture and construction. If you saw the list of guests for this season, maybe you saw that theme there, but we've got quite a bit of guests that are specialists in this realm, not just within Revit, but just within the realm of small scale residential construction. So this should be a lot of fun. Remember, we are live, so feel free to chat. I'm going to be checking out the chat the whole time and feeding in questions as we go through it. But with all that being said, and of course subscribe to the channel here on YouTube if you want to check out the live streams and know when they're live. But with all that being said, I did want to introduce our guest today, and our guest is Alex Gore. Alex, what's going on, man? How's it going? I'm glad to be here. Yeah. Thank you for patiently waiting in the green room. If you guys saw what I was doing before we went live, it was pretty entertaining. And Alex, you didn't even get to see it, but basically Zoom decided to do all kinds of weird crap on me. So hopefully all the screens are set up right and they're not just staring at your nose for 5 minutes while we're talking, but I think they're okay.
That's hilarious. We'll blame my blurriness not on my internet connection, but on that Zoom nonsense.
There we go. Well, Alex, thank you for joining me today. For those of you that don't know who Alex is, I think I'll give him a couple seconds to just do a brief overview, and then I think we'll dig in a little bit on you and how we've connected, but also sort of your path that got you to where we are today. So maybe just a quick introduction on who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I'm Alex Gore. I'm one of the principals of F9 Productions. We are a architecture firm and a construction firm, not necessarily a design build. The majority of our work comes from architecture. We just have build backgrounds. My business partner is Lance Psycho, so he has that too. I also teach at the University of Colorado. I teach in the architectural engineering department, engineering drawing, which is kind of Revit-based, drawing-based, and getting them familiar with that. And then have a podcast inside the firm that started out, is essentially now Lance and I's time to talk about business, talk about our firm, talk about macroeconomic policies and how they relate to what's going on, in a wide variety of topics there. And that's kind of the high level, quick couple sentences.
Awesome. And so before we jumped on this, I was trying to think of when you and I first connected. I know, and so for those of you who didn't see, I posted it on Twitter, and I think I sent an email out. I was fortunate enough to be on the podcast a couple weeks ago, but you and I connected, and I couldn't remember. It took me a long time, and then it eventually clicked. And I think it was when you were doing you were packaging some Revit furniture, I think, right?
I forgot about that.
Was that was 2012 or something like that?
No, I forgot to mention that too. So basically, and I'm sure we'll get into this, when we started our firm, we were able to start from scratch. You know, we had some training. Lance worked for a residential firm. It was a very high-end firm. And I worked for Studio Daniel Libeskind in New York. And then the '08 recession hit. And essentially we decided we had to, start it on our own. And what we did was then, instead of just taking AutoCAD standards over or just we did start with Revit out of the box. Mm-hmm. We thought, how do we mimic construction? And we took that in the way we make our walls and maybe we make our floors. And maybe later we can kind of show just that slight difference. Mm-hmm. So if I forget, and if you remember, I can show how those components work.
I'll remember.
Maybe
slightly. I'll remember.
Okay, different. And then we started growing, and we couldn't find anyone that had the skills So we asked if we could help CU, just literally like, can we come in and lecture or like give you a template so you just don't come out with like nonsense junk? And they're like, well, do you want to teach? And we're like, oh, I guess we'll do that. But anyways, we packaged that and sold our Revit, and it's basically focused on residential design. We've thousands of people now have bought it by now. It's, I mean, shameless plug, but just to be transparent, it's like $380 some, and it's our template that we've honed that we'll probably see later that we always iterate on, always improve on. But it's not just that. That's just what you get to kind of do the stuff. It's walking you through how to make like a cabin, how those components work and things like that. So I know you didn't ask for it, but like that that is how we met. And this had to be like 2012.
It was, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because when we chatted a couple weeks ago, I couldn't put my finger on it, because I know we've chatted virtually here and there, and we've emailed back and forth, and I couldn't remember when it started. And I believe, if memory serves me right, it was you shared with me a bundle that had a bunch of furniture families, and what was neat about them was, and I think you outright said in the beginning, you're like, most of these aren't parametric, but they're Revit native elements, but they look good for Revit, residential Revit. And it was just like these, this package of like things, and it was great. I mean, I remember at the time I was using them in some houses here and there, and just, it was like, if you didn't want to use the Korb chair or something from Revit to show a chair, I was like, this is awesome. I can just toss in this chair. And, it was a dining room chair. I didn't need to be parametric at the time, and so on. And I think, if memory serves me right, there was also a railing family that I really liked that you had that was like for a deck or something. I don't know.
And you're going deeper, which is great, because we initially started, it's so funny, during the recession, Lance and I were trying to get work and trying to do stuff, and his company was trying to get him to model for different companies, but it never worked out. But then he started doing it on, do you remember Turbo Squid back in the day?
Yes, it's still around.
Are you serious?
It's still around. Yep. And you could still buy, and there's some decent stuff. I've used it quite a bit for like twin motion content, because that you can bring out FBX files and non-parametric files, but really good looking files that are heavy mesh objects. And yeah, it's still around. It still exists.
I'm literally looking it up as you talk. It is. So that's how we got it started, and that was the first iteration, was just all those models, and then it went to the template, then it went to the training to kind of combine and put it all together, essentially.
Awesome. So I think it's kind of the way I wanted to structure this conversation is I do want to sort of get into the start of F9 and sort of your philosophy and how you guys are where you are, and then I think after that we can jump into some of the more geeky Revit stuff we were just kind of talking about, like how you maybe change your mindset from modeling when you're doing more of a design build. I'll put in quotations, because like you said, it's not necessarily design build, but it's similar type of and so I think that's kind of how I want to structure it. So before we jump in, by the way, there's a bunch of people from Colorado on here. They're super excited.
Oh, that's awesome.
Colorado. I don't know where in Colorado, but they just said Colorado. So a lot of Colorado representative in the chat, which is pretty cool.
Is anyone in North Colorado? Like, if anyone's in Longmont, we have to have coffee.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on the chat. If you're in Longmont, say it in the chat, and we'll connect you guys afterwards.
Yeah.
So F9, this is you and Lance, right? Are sort of the founders, I believe. So let's talk about maybe how that started and sort of how it grew to what it is today, and then I think what I'll do is I think we can weave in the technology side of it, because I do from speaking with you in the past, I do know that is not the only core principle, but there's a lot you do weave technology and BIM within the development of what F9 became.
Yeah. So in 2008, I was working out for Liebskin, and the recession happened. I'm sure a lot of people remember that. And our office was at Wall Street. Like, you get off at Wall Street Station. And we are on the 17th floor. And on the 17th floor, someone's going to hit me. We're on an architecture podcast. Basically like a parapet. There's probably a technical term. That projected about 2 feet out. So we would always like hang out of the window and just like look down. There's kind of a church and a cemetery there. Mm-hmm. And then like Wall Street is getting laid off, and we can see the people with the boxes and all that. And I just remember thinking, I'm like, I bet you we're next. And
Wall Street went before the architects. That's bizarre, right?
yeah, yeah. So then, I lasted for like, I don't know, 5, 6 months later, something like that. But basically 11 out of the 60 people at our firm got laid off. And then I remember having like beers with some of the guys later, and some of the guys that were still in the firms. And in New York, like especially a lot of kids come from Columbia, and work at other firms, and they all know each other.
Right.
So it's like shop, HOM, like everyone's there. And the advice that I got was get out of New York. Everyone's laying off like a third of their staff.
Right.
Like you aren't getting a job no time soon, just for so
yeah.
So I went back and got my construction management degree, and then I told Lance about this because like stuff happens in New York quicker than everywhere else. And then he had a couple more months before he got laid off, but he started to then build this turbo squid stuff, and then even get side jobs, and he got laid off. And then essentially like after that construction management degree, which was just basically a year, and then the like one summer course, but I was already with F9 at that point. So basically just like a year, the recession really wasn't like back, like 2009, like, and man, I don't even know if I even applied for other jobs. I just told Lance that I'm coming down. And it's so funny because the way I remember it, he was like, yeah, do it. The way he remembers it, he swears that he was like, I don't think you should do this. I don't like, I don't know about this. But it was like, I had $4,000 in my pocket. I wasn't going to live at my parents, or, like, here we go. And one of the first jobs that I got, and this relates to F9 and how it functions, and there's kind of two separate pillars, was I went after this job, and it was a weed grow facility, and it was on Craigslist. and got it, did the work, all that, but there was at least 12 people going after it. So I asked them later, I go, why did you pick me? And they said, you were professional, you were on time, and in the end you over-delivered. And I people have maybe heard me say this story before, but I said like, oh, I don't get what's different. Like, that's everyone. And then he just laughed at me. He's like, no, And as you work in the profession, you'll realize some people like are late. They don't do their work on time. They just give you a slop, So I didn't know that to begin with. I thought everyone was, gung ho. So I thought that. So then it literally just triggered in my brain like, oh, what if there's principles? And because I'm so young, I don't know how all buildings go together. It's so funny. After that first summer, I thought I learned so much and I was so smart that I was like, I know this is awesome. And now, like later, where obviously this is over 12 years later, I'm like, you knew absolutely nothing and you were an idiot, But I thought then we could rely on fundamental principles. And F9 started as the hotkey for 3D Studio Max, the render key.
Right.
And it evolved into 9 principles. And it started there with 3. And eventually we morphed it and got to 9, like serve the client, respond within an hour. And if you can't do that, within 24 hours. There's 9 of them. And that was kind of tenets that everyone at our firm knows. And not only is it just like on our website, we have a meeting every day where a different person, and if I'm going into tangents and
no, not at all, man. Go ahead.
where they present, it's 5 minutes, and it's on 5 things, and it's a win, a problem, a project, an improvement. That's 4 things. And maybe I'll remember the 5th thing by the time we go, but it's written down in a template and everyone knows to do it. And and a principle. That's what I forgot, which I'm talking about. And you relate any one of those 4 things to one of our 9 fundamental principles. So literally daily, they're hearing some sort of story of our principles relating. And it's sort of mass for our kind of mission statement, because part of it, one of the F9 is to have fun, right? I think F8 is, but it's probably not 8. Deliver value to be valuable. And then I already went over serve the client, the city, and the contractor.
I love that. I love how it started. It started as this geeky thing of like F9 is the render button, and then it morphed into the principles. And I think sort of thinking of like you said, 12, 13, 14 years ago, the I don't want to say naive, but like you said, naive with how much you thought you knew. And I think that alone, that story you just told, just shows the development of that aspect of like, hey, I got I have this tool, 3D Max, whatever it was, Revit, 3D Max, rendering, whatever it was, like this tool, this is how I can make money. But then you realize, hold on, it's not just the tool, there's a lot more to it, than the tool. So I'm interested to sort of from a technical standpoint or from a process standpoint, how if you looked back on those 10, 12 years, the process of designing and constructing, or at least designing and then documents and so on and so forth, like if you had to think about how that's changed in your mind, coming out of Studio Leapskin and out of New York, and maybe what that looked like versus basically starting from nothing and figuring out what is it going to look like for us, how did what did that journey look like for you as far as like building? Like you said, you built, over time, you started building a template. You started, obviously you start building standards and so on. And I'm assuming all of that ran parallel with this idea of this maturity of the company with the principles and so on. So I'm curious how, like, technically, how did the company mature over time from being an F9 key to the F9 principles? Did the same thing happen? Did you notice the same thing happening on the process end, or was it sort of, getting it done, and then slowly starting to realize, well, we can do it better, that kind of thing, or was it purposeful?
So the difference between Leapskin and F9 were kind of like opposites, meaning Leapskin was a studio culture, open desk, 8 to 10 people on a project, everyone's super cool, smart people, everyone's been in studio, right? And then F9, it was studio in the sense of it was just Lance and I in literally my dining room table. And I stole the idea from Leapskin, was just to take wooden tables. We just worked on wooden tables at Leapskin's on sawhorses. And I was like, we're just going to do the same thing,
Right.
But the difference was that now that we were in the recession, and Lance worked for a Studio HT and did high-end residential. And then Leapskin is obviously big, you know what it is. We go, okay, that doesn't exist at this moment, or at least it doesn't exist, and it's not going to exist for us.
Right.
So we are going to start out in residential remodels in that industry, which is totally, it's kind of related to custom residential, but it's not related to high Leapskin, right? And we go, okay, we also need to make a living to do that, and these aren't big projects that get high fees. So we need to be extremely efficient at that. So that's where we started out with the template-based thing, was how can this help us do it? And it's so funny because Lance makes fun of me because he started out in Revit, and then when I came, I started out in Revit. And I go in the beginning, I go, oh, this project would be so much easier for me to do in AutoCAD. Let's just switch back. And I swear he razzed me for like 5 years. Like, hey, you want to switch back to AutoCAD? No offense to people that use AutoCAD, but slight offense to people who use AutoCAD.
Slight offense.
Slight.
So you guys both went into this starting, and that was your platform, was Revit. That was your platform for documentation. Starting F9. So it wasn't like a dichotomy of one of you was a CAD user, one was a Revit user, or who knows what other program, and then came to it. So you both went into it knowing that this was the platform, and then from there you just used it to make your processes more efficient, so to speak.
Yeah. And honestly, like, it was, and here's a lesson. The first maybe the first 3 years was like heavy development and getting the work, and then like improving the template and stuff like that. But then we got it to a place where we really didn't need to touch it much or develop it,
Mm-hmm.
maybe for like 5 years.
Hmm.
And it hasn't been until the last 3 years when more people have come on board. Our firm isn't big.
Hmm.
It's depending on if interns are there or something like that, 7 to 9 plus, an admin staff and SEO and marketing people. And they're part-time and all over
Mm-hmm.
the place,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so it fluctuates in that. But anyways, in the past 3 years, with that morning meeting, and one of them is a process improvement. Like everyone can touch a template, or we have a common folder, a common project folder. We have a common file too that they can touch with because we don't want to overload our template. There's also just improvements of like workflow of how you do things, of how you sort your area and things like that. So I'm going on this rant because you asked about kind of the development and it wasn't a linear, we had this thought, we kept this thought, we grinded to it, we're awesome. It was, hey, we did this to survive, coasted on it for a while, and then realized, wait a second, what are we doing here? Right. Let's keep improvement.
Yep, and that's kind of what I was getting. I had a feeling that was sort of the case. That seems to be the case in most areas, right? It's survive, right, and then you start looking back on the inefficiencies of what was happening there, which is awesome. So I think what we'll do is we're gonna take a quick break, and when we get back from the break, I want to dig into sort of how that build side of it came into play, and then jumping into sort of how that impacted the way you approach your models. And
sure,
we're going to use Revit obviously, but I think this applies to if you were using Vectorworks or ArchiCAD or anything, just sort of how the thought process changes when you're doing both the design and the build of it. So before we jump into that though, I did want to take a moment to recognize our sponsor of this season of BIM After Dark Live, and I'll run this clip and we'll talk about it afterwards. So, as you saw from the clip right there, RevitFamily.biz is our sponsor this season. You guys know Brenton Weiberg. He's been on the show a few times, and he'll be back again this go around. I thought it was fitting, considering we are talking a lot about residential Revit and just residential architecture in general. For those of you that don't know what RevitFamily.biz is, it is a website created by Brenton Weiberg that has specifically door family packages, window family packages, and cabinet family packages focused strictly on residential for Revit, and they are phenomenal. And if you saw the last year I did the modern kitchen renovation series, I used his cabinets and talked quite a bit about it, so definitely check that out. Brenton did not only just support this episode and this season, but he also is offering you guys 20% off any bundle, package, or family on his website. So head on over to revitfamily.biz and use RevitKid23 as a promo code to save 20% off. So thanks, Brenton, and thank you guys for supporting those who support this show. Okay, so before we jump in, there were a couple people from Colorado, Alex,
nice.
that jumped in and said where they were from, and I kind of missed some of them, but there was somebody who actually I think might have been close. Where was it? Oh man, it disappeared.
While you're looking, if anyone wants to email me, akg@f9productions.com.
AKG at F9. So yeah. Somebody, Michael Pukas, who's actually a member of the BIM After Dark community. So Michael, nice to see you here. He's about 2 to 3 hours. He's in Gypsum, Colorado, so it's a little far from Longmont. And then there was someone here who said they were pretty close, but I don't remember where it was from. Shoot, I lost it.
Boulder, Lafayette, yeah. Bunch of different places.
Yeah, I lost it now. All right. Oh, just south of Longmont, Louisville. Is it
Louisville, yeah,
Colorado?
very close.
There we go. We got one close.
We got our coffee.
I don't even know who that was. I lost it now. Shoot. Noah Mason is from Louisville. So no.
All right,
is it
email
Louisville
me, Noah.
or is it Louisville? What is it for
Louisville in Colorado?
In Colorado, it's Louisville. All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm just reading through. Actually, Noah's comment down here. I'm just reading through. So if there's any chat that fills into our conversation, Alex, I'll bring it in there. I just want to check it out. So, kind of where we left off is we're talking about sort of the progress of the firm itself and the progress of kind of the technology side. So I'm interested in and when we were talking before this, sort of first, was the thought always to do some sort of project management, construction management, or building of the work yourself from the beginning, or is that something that came in later on?
No, it wasn't a thought until we decided that we were going to do one fun project a year, and we were going to build a tiny house. There's a whole story behind that. I don't know if I need to go into it, but essentially we built a tiny house, and it got on HGTV because I told them that we were building it. It was a complete lie. We had to go get money and all this stuff and do it. And then after that, we built that. Then a Fortune 500 company got a hold of us, and they saw that tiny house, which isn't this tiny house, and they wanted us to build 2 of these. And these essentially, they're actually kind of complicated, to be honest. And right before this got started, my first child was being born, so I designed all of this. And basically, there's this huge fold down section, which is the whole way, and then this whole deck is the whole thing that folds up, and these are on gas struts, and then these are on hydraulics up here, and then because this needs to fold down, and then all these fold, the railings fold down, and the stairs pop off, and there's actually this whole wing system on the other side. And that, do you see, like, there's these supports right here? These supports, this is like one of the powerful things of Revit and BIM, was like I had to draw these out because the metal manufacturer person had to do it. And what I did instead was I just modeled it, and then I rotated it. There's a little latch here, and there's a latch up here, and I rotated it so that I could figure out where these need to go, and basically just modeled it, and then derived all the drawings off of the model. And everything, like, out of everything that folds and moves and stuff, the only thing that went wrong was apparently in the model when I drew this out, I drew it 6 inches too long. So we just had to come and cut it and then make this stair 6 inches shorter. Like,
so out of all the things, it was just a stair that screwed
up. Yeah. And maybe I'll go, maybe there's some construction pictures here. Let's see if I can, here we go. Technical difficulties. Yeah. Okay. So here's, the modeling of those connections right there. And then here's the crane that we rented. And fitting inside of these brackets is like a 32nd of an inch tolerance. And it's so funny to then continue that, like, we didn't. Yeah, I'll keep going with the story because I think it's important. After this, we had enough money to buy land, because our idea was that we designed a whole bunch of multifamilies. So we know how to do townhomes. So we did 8 townhomes in our own headquarters. And we were going to build it ourselves, and the banks were having problems because they're like, you guys aren't really builders. And then finally said, yeah, you can build it as long as you guys don't rent a crane and do anything like that. And we just looked at each other and laughed, and we were like, oh, we do that. We do that kind of stuff all the time, but we won't for this project. And here's the structural frame of that project. But what I'm getting to is, essentially, we thought that after we built that our headquarters in the 9 other units, it's like, okay, after we do 9, like, obviously we're going to do 18. And then obviously we're going to do 36 after that and keep growing. The problem and especially all the architects listening here, is that if you go through any development that's bigger than a house or a duplex, you go through site plan review. And at least, I mean, like if you're in any major city, if you're in the county, that's different. That's a year-long process. And it actually took us a year and a half. And then it was a year to build, and then it might be like 6 months to close or sell out. So like you're talking a 2.5-year process. And we thought, and it's risky because we had to put up substantial amount of money, to make this happen.
Right.
And also there was a flood, like literally one of our units flooded right before it was done. Extremely stressful, just crazy. Like the stress was unbelievable. Like the amount of working, like getting up at 4 and getting home at 7, which doesn't seem late, but like out in the field while trying to run a firm and manage construction for like 90 days straight is not fun,
Yeah.
So we looked at that and we thought, hey, if we built 4 houses in a year, which we don't build 4 houses in a year at this time, like we'd make the same amount of profit. Plus there's no risk. Like we aren't taking it because it's our clients who are our architecture clients that we're turning into construction projects. So we totally pivot just for sanity, monetarily and for security. Just, like they're taking out the loan and all that. Right. So I've built a house, framed a house, worked on a couple additions and remodels. Lance is now taking more of that over. Same thing. And then now we're doing maybe even some bigger houses for some clients. So that's where the kind of build side went into it. And the translation too is that because, like we don't always build, that knowledge comes back. Right. And it just helps our architecture side.
Right. And that's exactly why I was so interested about, framing the topic this way is I think, when you do that, and so, when you're constantly in the architecture bubble, and as architects we can say this, and so when you're living in the bubble of architecture, it's easy to not learn those things that you're talking about on the construction side, right? And then but I've also seen how much those can influence how you approach that. And so that's kind of where I'm curious is so taking on that, yes, you're taking on risk, but depending on how the structure is, it may not be any more risk than you already have being the architect of the project, let's say. But going through that process, how did that modify how you approached not just your documents, but how you even built your models? Like a perfect example is what you were saying with the tiny homes, and you realize that like the more you modeled and figured out in the model, the easier it was to build it, right? That's a pretty obvious one. But I'm just curious on how you've seen the process evolve now. Once you started taking over, whether you call it construction management, project management, or builder, it doesn't matter. But overseeing the process of the construction of your designs. How did you see that now folding back into how you approach your modeling and your documentation?
Yeah. What's crazy and awesome about being on a construction site so much is that it makes so much sense more quicker, and it's so much easier and simpler because like if you have this drawing up, like here's a typical, it's a small house, it's a framing plan of the floor, like that's a complicated drawing. Like there's a lot of information there. And then also I remember it was, who knows what the class was called, probably detailing or something like that. And our professor was awesome, but all he would do is draw sections. He would just draw sections and sections and sections. And you know how like you can miss like one key item and then like the whole thing doesn't make sense? Like, maybe I'm stupid, but I'm not that stupid, but like I couldn't get over the fact when they cut a section, they would always draw a window and they would draw all these, like either beams coming through or cantilevers. And I'm like, how is that supported? Like how is that supported? Or when people draw waterproofing details, like they're so intricate. There's so much to it. And every time I go and I'm reviewing those or going over that with someone on our team, I always just think about, okay, how did they do this out in the field? And it's so much simpler when it's there because once you go through the process, you see like, okay, the concrete guys do the concrete things, and then the wood does this, and then like everything is there like sequentially, and then you can see how it overlaps and how it works. And what we did to like kind of enhance and bring that out is like, okay, how do we start to convey that even more? Because um, honestly, a lot of baby boomers are retiring, and and that knowledge is going away. And where we're seeing it the most is we used to just only be really mad at the planning department because they were so illogical and whatever. But now it's getting more in the building department, and what we've noticed is like, hey, Frank, that's been there for 40 years, retired, and now there's two younger people, Alex and Jeff, are there. They barely know anything. So they're asking you to literally put the whole IRC on the drawings, or just random parts of the IRC,
Right.
or to explain how you comply with random parts of the IRC. And you want to shake them and say like, stop this nonsense, right? But what I'm getting at is that that's not probably only happening there. It might be happening in the field. So anything we can do to essentially show that in 3D in a more simple term, and sometimes we'll even label this. So like, oh, you take a look at this. Here's your joist. Here's something different because it's shaded different, and here's your major load points coming down. It makes more sense. It easily makes more sense. I think I have another example, but might take a while to pop up.
No,
So
I think that I love that, and I think that's exactly where I thought you were going to go, which is, I think it changes when the intent, when you start thinking about how it's being built, and the intent of your modeling is for construction versus, honestly, but if I would say more than design intent is the construction intent, and how you not only model it but how you show it. I think that's a great example right there. Just that 3D view there of how, the simply adding a 3D view to a drawing, for example, it seems bizarre, but I mean the next step is obviously getting the models into the hands of the contractors. But at least at a minimum you can get them on the drawing so that people understand the design intent better. So I love that.
And it also helps too. What we found was we now have a laser scanner. And we never went and bought one of those $20,000 or $30,000 one. We went and we got one that was like 5,000 some hundred, and then the stand and some other things. We had a whole podcast on it. So like if you search inside the firm about laser scanner, it'll go over all the equipment. And what I'm talking about is like not just for the those frames not only help people out in the field, but it helps the people inside the office understand. So Colorado had that fire, and a lot of things burnt down. And this is a house that's being, rebuilt there. So, like you have the footprint, and you're trying to remake these people's lives. And if I just, there we go. Let's just hide the category. You can see, we laser scanned it, and then we asked Rebecca, we go, I know this is going to be painful, but like model all the remaining roof trusses. Just like the lasers, where they are. Like, right. And this is probably just generic modeling. It's not like we're being super advanced with it. Like, I don't even know if we categorized it correctly. But now when we're putting in our ceilings and seeing how the stairs go from here to there, we can see, okay, this is what's left. This is what we're going to keep. The rest of these trusses are gone. So let's say we did want to vault in here for whatever reason, we could have. But just taking that level, and going into there and showing here's what's left, here's what's new. It just helps visualize everything.
And so it's funny because I have these conversations on a daily basis, and like at the end of the day, I think sort of if we're gonna talk principles, I think the principle of it is, especially when we're talking about this scale of construction. You'll never regret modeling too much in this sense. Like, understandable that you might want to draw a line at some point, right? You don't need every nail and every screw and every bolt necessarily modeled in most conditions. Maybe there's very specific timber or something where you want it, but that kind of thing. But you'll never ever regret modeling too much or going, and it doesn't take that much effort. Like, yeah, you said they have the trusses there, right? But, there's scissor trusses, they're probably very similar along there. I mean, honestly, that was probably a couple hours to model those trusses, and now you've got the information. How valuable is that information? And I have this conversation all the time when it comes to existing conditions. Is like, how much should we model for existing conditions? Like, as much as humanly possible, I think, right? Because you're never going to regret, right? How much information is there, whether you use it or not.
Yep. And a couple of other things that happened. This might be something that's standard practice in other firms, but since Lance and I were so shortly at other firms, we kind of developed our own system and then continually asked the field. So the electrical person said, like, hey, and especially for houses, well, I mean, I'm sure this is more common on bigger projects, but for houses, a lot of times the power plan and the lighting plan will be on the same thing.
Yes.
And he just asked us to separate it. So it's like, okay, we can do that. Another thing too, let's go to the main floor plan here. Is how we dimension. This might not be the best example. Yeah, it's probably not the best example. So essentially, we meant dimension not from center lines, but from exterior face to exterior face, because that's the way our framers essentially like it. And to go a little bit further, there we go. Okay, so for our walls, how our walls are broken up, you'll see that we'll have essentially an exterior framing wall because we're mimicking construction, right? We happen to put the gypsum layer in there, but it's just the framing wall and the gypsum layer. And then we don't have, and a lot of times why the sheathing and everything else is on the other layer. So if I went to walls and if I was going to sheath it, one, for a couple of reasons, I don't have to make that decision now. Like not what the sheathing is, but what the siding is. And also the sheathing goes down over the floor box. And I know you can go in section and like change it and play with that. But if it's already separate, you can already, make it go. It's easier to make it go where it's at. So then we have exterior finishes. And the same thing is with floors. We have our regular floors and then our finished floors and things like that. And maybe this is becoming more standard now, but like 5 years ago, and especially from our podcast, we got a lot of people. And Nick is a guest on our podcast. He always does Nick Reads. And he's an architect in Florida and an awesome one. And he goes, because we finally said, hey, he was trying to teach people and he didn't have time. I go, just go to Revit Rocket Ship, whatever. Here you go, train them. And then he's like, I watched it and he goes, holy shit, I've been using Revit wrong for 9 years.
No, that is becoming more common. Starting to see the walls being broken up into layers for the sake of there's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, like you were saying there, maybe it's because you don't want to make the decision yet. Maybe it's because of the actual constructability of it and the order of construction and so on and so forth. Maybe the way you want to do takeoffs, etc. It started, definitely like brick and masonry facades, especially were kind of always not always, but it was ideal to do it that way because then you could really control the returns and the weeps and the shelves and all that stuff. But I'm seeing more and more of it, and it doesn't really change the workflow all that much. Is the interesting part, right? A lot of people get nervous because you're drawing 3 walls maybe instead of 1, but all you got to do is select the 3 walls when you move them, and it works just like the 1 did. So it's not as bad as they make it out to be. And a lot of times, especially for exterior, like it's almost a no-brainer.
A lot of times too, we have the client kind of cement the floor plan and schematic design where we only have those walls, so it's easy to pull the dimension to that wall, right there. And then in design development is where that wall, that finish gets talked about, because the massing is where it matters, right? Like you could have a massing with a projection that has, stone or metal or whatever, and all of them could look good if the massing and the bones and the windows are all right. So we don't apply that skin until halfway through the project.
I because you have this up and you're zoomed in right here, I'm curious, the showing the studs at all the openings, is that something that you took away from field experience as well, or
This,
what's the where'd that come from?
we this came from it did. So on our sometimes we do our structural plans, and then sometimes it's farmed out, right?
Hmm.
But when we do them, and when we're putting in the header, now we have a family, and
Hmm.
that family, has different options, two king studs, stuff like that. It's flexible, it's parametric, and now that it's physical, what happened was someone put in. Somehow it got missed that the header in some window or over some doors was 12 inches and we only had 8 inches. You know, now when it's and because it was just annotated,
Right.
it's just
Hmm.
annotated. So now it's, if you cut a section through here, which there is a section through here, right? Whew, look, that one barely fit. Good for us. There it is. You can see it, and you can see if it was going into there or not.
No, that's an awesome idea. When I'm similar approach when I'm doing smaller smaller additions, I'll model the all of the studs, all the headers, all that stuff. But it's a great approach to, when you think about it, to only do openings in specific areas, knowing that the in between are studs at 16 inches on center for the most part, right? So
Yep.
it does make a lot of sense. I've never thought about building that header family like that, where you have the king stud, the plates and everything, and then you can just bump it around. That's an awesome idea. That's a cool tip.
And a lot of the team is more in the Revit models than myself,
Hmm.
because I am pretty sure that this model or a model similar to it, when you flex the size, it automatically flex the header.
Hmm.
And here's what I'm getting at. It's not that it's necessarily correct,
Hmm.
right? But it's that, hey, let's say you're putting these in and the engineer is going to review them later. If you went from, let's just say, 4 foot to 12 foot,
Hmm.
it should automatically get somewhat larger. And from our experience, we know that's going to be 3 LVLs or 2x12s or something like that. So like normally it's pretty close.
Hmm.
But that helps too.
Yeah, and again, that's another example of, you won't regret modeling it, because if it doesn't fit, you spin around that model, you're like, oh shit, what is this thing sticking through my my plate at the top there? And you're like, oh wait a minute, that header's got to be 12 inches
Yep.
now. No, that's a
And
great, that's an awesome, and those, I can imagine that being very useful, having walked the site with framers many times on residential projects, and realizing how valuable it is to point to them in 3D views, like how headers are constructed, and and what I guess I'm going immediately to, like, well, what if it's the headers up at the floor plate, but that's, we're getting into the weeds there, but
right.
I get the idea is brilliant. I love it.
Yep. This is a very preliminary model, but I just wanted to show you this because the other one didn't have it because it was fire burn stuff.
Mhm.
Basically, we also have two levels here.
Mhm.
Some people have one. We have two because this is where the walls is going to. Then the floor box fits in between. The reason why there's a gap here is because there's normally a concrete wall under here, and that's that base plate mud
Mhm.
sill, all that. So that's a little bit different too
Mhm.
than I see when I get other architects' models.
Yeah, and that, yeah, exactly, and there's validity to that argument too. I think you'll hear people go both ways, whether you need
Yep.
a level for that or not. And a lot of times it'll be, it depends. But I think for strictly residential, if you're doing stick built wood frame construction, it kind of makes sense, because then you can control sill plates versus top plates and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just reading some questions here. How do you that people are loving some of these tips, which is awesome. Yeah, awesome. So no, that's cool. I think that proved a lot of what we were talking about there, and it's kind of cool to see. So I'm curious, like, even just those examples we talked about, if you thought back 5, 6, 8 years ago, how differently did you guys approach, like, maybe producing a set and a model for, like, a house like the one there? Would you say it was pretty different?
I would say the structural stuff really helped
Hmm.
kind of button it all up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we are on the trajectory because that first push of the 3 years got us to a good level, and then we were, just flat. It's just now all of these little things are really adding up. And what I'm curious at too, and not to flip the script, because I know that that's not always the coolest, but
no, of course it is. Come on. This is a live show.
Yeah, to flip the script is how is this AI now going to start to play? And I think everyone was so infatuated with, like, if you tried MidJourney, what it was called, and you saw how fast it created a semi-realistic thing, and you realize, especially if you're our age, right? Me and you remember like how much these things had to chug, these computers, to pull out a rendering. It's like, you can do that in 2 seconds. And then now how that's going to integrate with Revit and all that. And what's actually my pessimistic view, and I want to hear yours. I have a pessimistic view and optimistic. Pessimistic is that it might allow more unqualified people to create these things. And I feel like that is what has happened. And it's not just us, like probably Excel spreadsheets has allowed unqualified people to take that job and just, put in numbers and have it do it for it. I feel like that, I don't know how deep that goes, but I feel like that's one. And then the unpessimistic is, it's going to trifurcate into what we already have. You have people lowballing it that will just say, hey, I'll make you a thing, I'll make you in 2 days, and it's just going to be whatever AI spits out. It's not going to be, like, all of a sudden you'll realize that you go in there and the spaces don't really work out, and, whatever. Then you'll have your mid group that's kind of efficient and kind of helping out. And then you always have your bespoke high end, hey, we use these tools, but we really take care and look at the details and all that stuff. What is your thought on this?
So it's interesting. I'm actually in the process of making a video for the channel right now on project or Veras, which is a built-in Evolve lab that really, really neat. Basically, kind of like the next step of MidJourney, where it's built within Revit, and I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think I can see both sides, but having played around with these tools a lot now, notice I still call them tools. I think there's still a lot that the human has to do. Maybe it won't be. It's one day, but for now, there's still a lot that the human has to do that will produce the results. I mean, we see it right now with Twinmotion and Lumion and stuff. It's like technically anyone now can produce a really beautiful scene, but you can give it to 100 people, and there's still only going to be 5 or 6 who actually make a beautiful scene. You know what I mean? Because that's the human part of it. And so with AI, it's the same thing. Like, it'll do it all, but someone still has to sort of train the dragon, so to speak, to some extent. And that's what I've been feeling too as I'm using it. Is it still has a lot more. There's still a lot of human, like, to get results that the human is looking for. There's still a lot of interesting input. So to that extent, I think there's still. It may not like take jobs, but it may just create different forms of those jobs, right? And then you think about analytics and stuff, and like you were saying, the structural side of it and whatnot. It's like, there's a lot of computational math going on there, and I would imagine that it'll take some of that grunt work out of it, and I think it's just a matter of being flexible to what your job is within that new realm when it happens, right? But right now, as it stands, there's still so much human interaction needed and input needed, and then feedback needed, and then after the fact, that I think it's still just a tool, right, for the time being. So
2 questions for you on that. One, do you know Bill Allen from Evolve Lab?
Yep.
Have you had him on?
No, but I haven't had him on, but he will be featured in the video coming up. So
okay, yeah, reach out to him.
Yep. We did a little interview for that video, so there's going to be some stuff with Bill and Ben from that. But yeah, so I think that's kind of my take on it. I think it's I'm not afraid of it taking any of our jobs. I'm more interested in how we use it as human beings.
I do agree it's a tool. My only concern that I'm wrestling with, and I'm not trying to be an old fuddy-duddy, like our professor thought the computer made stuff for us, and we are tackling AI and integrating it into our firm and all that stuff. But here's my concern is kind of what you touched upon. It was like, hey, it can make a pretty picture, right? But like there's so much more. Me and you and like I mean we just talked about like little nuances of like how we model headers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um so there's so much more to a good project. My fear is that people are going to be convinced by the ability to create these pretty pictures and all of a sudden get locked into like a terrible process or like and they might not even know it's a terrible process or a terrible building or a terrible outcome or too much money because it's so convincing. And I'll give you one example of that. I went back, we got some award from our alma mater. I shouldn't say some. It was a very honoring award for anyone under 15 years. It was basically their achievement award for the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very honored that they gave it to Lance and I. But I went obviously to the architecture department, and they were giving presentations, and I was just blown away by how NDSU, by the way, professional it was, put together, and how good the renderings were.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was talking to some of the professors that I still know, and I go, these are just amazing, just amazing. Like I was just gushing over them, and some of the concepts were awesome too. And one of the professors, being an older professor, said, yeah, those pretty renderings hide a lot of stuff. And I immediately snapped back to reality and then remembered like, oh, I've dealt with these students. Like I understand that they don't know how this connects. They don't know the depth of this. So they don't know all this. And I got caught up in that. And then to go on to your point of this and just throw one last thought on you with potential is like, so I teach and I see some people with potential and some people then take it and they make that pretty picture. And honestly, it's like you said, it's like five out of 50 are going to be amazing. But now with these tools, it might be like 20, 30, 40 that look amazing. But deep down, I go, no. Some of you just pressed a button and have no idea. Like it did. There's nothing behind it. There's no way to make this get built. And I guess that's what I'm just exploring with you now.
Yeah. No. I it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But I do think when it comes to that kind of stuff, the pragmatism, has to come into play, and those that can balance both the pretty picture with the pragmatic side of it are the ones that will succeed anyways. but there's always going to be those cases, right, where I think, but again, it'll be how you use it and whatnot. To me, I still don't see. I still see the human aspect of it being the driver for now, I guess is what we would see. But yes, it is incredible how easy it is now to do those things, how fast it is to do those things. But some of the things that I love about it is when you use a program like Veras is you can keep a majority of your model there, right? So your design is there, and now the AI is just maybe creating the fantasy context it's in, right? Which we've all spent hours putting together, backgrounds and used to be Photoshop, putting trees and grass and people and shadows and all that stuff, and now it's like boom, and it looks beautiful, the perspectives are right. Or even flipping through iterations, and that's where I think it's probably the coolest is, you can slide the bar enough to where it holds your massing, and you're just flipping through materials maybe, or even various window options, and most of these things are pulling from existing sources. So it's really just like overlaying an inspiration board on top of your building and then doing it like 15 times and seeing which one sort of bing. But then you'd still have to go back, and guess what, you'd have to model it in Revit for construction, and it would have to be real then, right? So yep. That's the human aspect. So I think there's going to be a lot of good and maybe a lot of bad coming out of it, but either way, I'm excited for it. I think it'll be fun.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I'm just checking to make sure there's no final questions here. I think we're were pretty good. There's a couple people just giving their thoughts on AI, so you'll have to check that out in the chat afterwards.
Will do.
Alex, you can see what everyone had to say.
Yeah.
There was one question specifically about what you were talking about with Revit that I wanted to pull up, where it was, I think it was more along the lines of, when it comes to that process where you're doing the layering of the walls, for example, it was kind of along the lines of, at what phase would you start maybe taking it from the more maybe single layer to adding layers, and sort of, how does that look in maybe like the phase over time, DD or SD, DD, whatever.
Yep. So essentially what I would call this, what you're seeing on the screen right now, which is that one layer of 2x6 walls and gypsum on the middle. This would be a mid schematic design level. It's basically, hey, here's the shapes, here's the kitchen, there's nothing in it. Here's a TV cave, all that. I would obviously clean it up, because this isn't, cleaned up or anything, present it to the client, and they'd say, hey, we got to move this, we got to flip the garage, whatever it is. And then after we go through
a huge garage, by the way.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. After we go through a couple of, like that phase is done, now we're in design development. And you can see too here, let's take a look at, not that one. Here we go. So this still isn't flushed out to give to the client, but like, oh, there's there's massing of windows. There's not like punching of windows yet or anything like that. So you can get a feel for it. Then in DD, now we're adding the skin wall and putting in more windows and stuff like that. We'll always put in some windows or leave some openings just to give them the mass void effect of what's going on. But in schematic design, there is no facade walls whatsoever, and very, very little windows.
Awesome. So, and I would imagine that somewhere between DD and CD is when you would start adding in those structural elements we've been talking about, and some of those details, and start, because then now you're saying, okay, I'm starting to think, the skin, the look is there. Now let's start putting the bones in and seeing if they fit, type of deal, right?
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Well, that was a good question. I forgot who asked it, so thanks whoever asked it. I think it was Karen, I think was her name, so thanks, Karen. Awesome. Well, this has been great, Alex. I really appreciate you coming on. I think we had some really neat and valuable conversations, and I think people in the chat agreed. So hopefully anyone looking in the future, hopefully you enjoyed it too. Any final thoughts before we head off, Alex?
That's it. Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Awesome, man. What's the best way people can contact you or reach out or connect?
You can look up F9 Productions. We're on all the social stuff like that. Inside the firm, if you ever want to hear us. And then you can email me. I hope you don't have 100,000 listeners. AKG
not 100,000. No, not 100,000. There might be a few, but not 100,000. So we'll see. We'll see how much spam you get from that. Sorry.
Fair enough.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. This was a great time, and I enjoyed myself, and I hope everyone else enjoyed the conversation as well. So with that, everyone else, thanks for joining us. We have a new guest next week. Don't forget to head on over to revitfamily.biz and take advantage of that 20% off. I look forward to these next 9 episodes or so with you guys. Thanks for joining me live, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And with that, I want to bid you all adieu, and have a great weekend, everyone.